The following session will demonstrate how to use the gradient shader to create your own custom shading network using render trees. So the first step here is to select this the head model and apply a constant shader and go under render tree. And instead of using the texture gradient shader, we'll use instead the gradient mixer here. So the gradient mixer is has what we call an input from which the actual lookup in the gradient will occur. So under the input tab you have really an input value, and that is used to do the lookup in the gradient space. So if I do a render region here, the actual color being rendered is yellow. The reason is simple, is because the input is 1. So whenever it's 1, the actual the max, the extreme limits of the gradient is being evaluated. So 1 is basically here and 0 is right there. So if we type 0, we'll get red. If we type 0.5, we'll get pretty much this value right in the middle, which is bluish color. If we actually change the range, so it is possible that whatever you connect to this input value may actually exceed this 0-1 limit or range. And let's say, for example, you may connect something that expresses the distance, for example. So you may want to put, let's say, 10. So in this case, 10, to be able to get this color here, you need to type 5. And that is a nice way. This is pretty much the same thing as a change range shader. And instead of actually forcing the user to always connect the change range, we basically implemented this directly in the shader because it was really useful to have it there. So let's put it back to 0.5 and have the actual active range of 0.1. And we'll use this shader to create a custom shading network. The next step here is actually to go under illumination and use the Incidence Shader. The Incidence Shader is also known as being the facing ratio. So it's basically the distance or the angle difference between two vectors. So in this case, by default, if you connect it to input, you'll get this thermal, imagery look. It's because the incidence is actually returning the angle between the surface and the camera. So whenever the surface is pointing towards the camera, it's told like both they are really aligned, you'll get a value of 1. So whenever the surface is pointing away from the camera, you'll get black, 0. So 0 in this case is more like red color. Now what we'll do, we'll go under the incidence and change it because we want to have not surface versus camera incidence, but we rather want to have surface versus light, which is pretty much the same thing as having a shading node. So now we have one light source, and as you can see now the actual gradient is being driven using this angle. So if I go black and white, for example, now I get a pretty standard Lambert type shading, pretty simple, pretty fast also to render. Now what's happening is the Incidence Shader is bounded to respect this 90-degree border. So whenever the actual surface is pointing away from the light by 90 degrees, it will basically go towards 0. So anything that is beyond 90 degrees will always return 0. So that's why you get this dark color in the back. So it's not really and this pretty much also limit for most of the shading nodes like Phong, Lambert, and all the other standard CG illumination shaders, and nothing is actually being computed when the actual angle is past 90 degrees. And as we know, let's say for example skin, you really need to have a little bit more than 90 degrees, maybe 110 or 120 for example, to get this realistic look. So the shading range here can be changed to 180 degrees, and that increases the actual active range for the gradient to break away from this 90 degrees and basically have this gradient that wraps the object totally. The cool thing about this is now that the gradient now is totally going from really 0 degrees to really in the back, which is 180 degrees. Obviously this probably is a little bit too bright, so in this case what we want to do is this is 90 degrees, so we'll get back exactly at what we used to have, and we'll extend it to about, let's say, something like this, more like 120, 130 degrees, which is a little bit more realistic look in terms of shading. Now, something that is really fun with this setup is you can actually create rim light or backlight, and using the gradient. So you can actually create and add a new marker and set this thing to be slightly off. So you can actually put this thing this way and dim down. Actually, let me just do this like this. Et voila. So now you can actually, just by using one light, you can actually simulate two lights in the scene without adding more lights. So that is really a nifty way of creating this look. So that creates this very natural, very soft look with this particular technique. So I invite you to watch the other session. Thank you.